Gerri Aurre is someone that I met here at the art salon and discovered very quickly that no matter who we were talking about in the world of art, she knew about them. Gerri Aurre has been an art educator for many, many years and has a master's degree in art history, and came down to Florida and settled in Tequester and has been one of the initiators of the Village Art Studios. So I look forward to hearing more about that in addition to your presentation.
I thought I would start out by showing you the basic map of the Biennale, because it's so fascinating, the fact that you go to Venice, you get off the train, for those, I'm sure a number of you have been there, you get off the train and then you're on the water all the time on the Vaporettos. You just buy your ticket, that's it, you jump on and off. So it's an extremely easy city to deal with, to see everything. And this is the Grand Canal, St. Mark's Square down here. And here is the Giardini, and up behind it is the Arsenale. The Giardini is the garden area. It was Napoleon's gardens. And the Arsenale is the boatyard that opened in the 12th century. Marco Polo went out of the Arsenale. This was the 55th Biennale. It started in 1895, and its structure is that of the 19th century exhibitions, which none of the other art fairs and shows around the world are. None of them are done that way, where it's by nations. Some consider it a very antiquated way of going about showing art. I found it to be fascinating because most of the countries, it's one or two, maybe three artists, and there's really a perspective coming out of the country that kind of unifies the exhibit, and it's terrific. So besides these two spaces, these are the spaces around the city. So it's a hunt the whole time you're there to find country exhibits, and then they have other exhibits as well besides the countries. People will just rent the space. And the Biennale runs from June until November every 2 years. This year there were 88 countries involved, 10 more than there had been previously. So it's growing. And the other fantastic thing, besides the paper, like we have at Art Basel, the newspapers, which make you understand what it is you're seeing and the whole approach to the exhibit, they put out a book. This was fantastic because instead of coming upon a piece and having to go over and read, you have it right in front of you. And in the middle, I would stop, go for a coffee, sit down, and be able to review what I had seen. I thought it was a fantastic way of going about it. This is the Palazzo Encyclopedio this year. And the main building of the Giardini, it's a gallery setup in one building. And also at the Arsenale, it's one big long building. And they have a curator for that part of the show. And this year it was Massimilio Gioni, and he's one of the curators from the New Museum in New York, and an Italian. And the New Museum is probably the most contemporary museum right now in the city. But his feeling was that the Biennale had gotten to the point where it was a scattershot of only the most contemporary things going on in the world with no history, and he wanted to bring it back to a historical perspective, and he wanted to bring it to the way people think creatively. And a lot of it he did with people who were kind of outsiders, not the heavy hitters. He didn't want to just have the superstars at this, so it was people from all walks of life, outsiders, not necessarily young people. And this was, you walk through the gardens and then you enter La Biennale. And one of the first rooms you came to, there was a performance going on. It opened with Carl Jung's, which they didn't allow us to take pictures, Carl Jung's Red Book. So it was a whole thing about memory and the way people think, and an illustrated manuscript that Carl Jung had created. This was on the wall. It's a huge mosaic made out of glass and ashes and all kinds of remains, and it's a thing to 9/11. On the table, these were over 300 houses collected from a junk shop. They were all neatly wrapped. They were some person's hobby that these artists came upon, and it was like creating a whole world, a whole visual world. This is an artist that she does these paintings in extreme, extreme detail so that the body becomes almost an object, and she works on them for months and months and months. Just every single solitary detail on the person's body. You're looking at, of course, things that appealed to me. I mean, if any one of you were there, your pictures would be entirely different than mine. This is Maria Lasnig, and I've seen her a number of times at Art Basel down here and in museums in New York. And she's 94 years old, and she received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Biennale. And what she's showing is aging. It's her body aging and everybody else aging. They're supposedly morbid, but I find them, for the most part, to be kind of, it brings a smile to my face because I kind of like the way she's looking at life. It's serious and dire, but there's a funny side to it. This was a very interesting artist. I didn't know who she was. These were paintings that were almost as large as you're looking at there, and there was a room full of them, and she painted each one of them in a day. And they were extraordinary. They had a wonderful feeling. They were very dark like this, but she had those shards of light that I thought were wonderful. This is where you stop for a coffee, and then I could read my book. This is the sign entering the Giardini. This is the Egyptian exhibit, and I thought it was very interesting because it looked like it was ceramic on the wall, and to me it was the ruins of civilization. This was just after Mubarak lost his spot. And this reminded me of the hieroglyphics that you find in a tomb. And the space was very, very dark, so it was tomb-like. And that's a whirling dervish. It was quite large and beautiful. This was the Venetian exhibit, and they did a whole series on Venetian textiles because the history of Venetian textiles is so long and extraordinary. And this is all made from threads. This was another woven piece coming off the floor. This was a small weaving, very intricate in detail. There's that same, the one I was looking at before, with the threads going across the floor. This is the American Pavilion, and Sarah Z was the invited artist. Sarah Z was in Venice from March until June, setting up her installation. I had seen her work a few times before, and the name didn't, it takes me a while for the name to become embedded. Finally, I got to the point where I realized I was seeing the same person's work over, and that's kind of how I learned the name. I see the work over and over, and I go, ah, it's that person. And she did a bird feeder on the High Line in New York that I had sent all my friends pictures of because I thought it was such a fabulous piece, and then realized who had done it. So she came with all of her assistants. She said she had about 50% of it done beforehand, and then because she was living in Venice, it took on a lot of Venice. And it was inside and outside the building. Now, the American Pavilion has pillars. It's a very formal Georgian-type building. So what she did was she completely changed the entrance so you didn't enter through that formal center of it. She kind of set you off. And each room was a fantastic environment of all common-day objects, and you felt like you were really living in the space. She's been compared to a combination of Jackson Pollock and Cy Twombly, but rather than looking, you're in the midst of it. It's just amazing to walk through her piece. And it was room after room it was almost dizzying. And this was what would have been the formal entrance, but you came at it from the side, and there was just this large boulder in the space. It was quite magical. I mean, again, the attention to detail. It was about water and land and air were her three focuses. This was interesting. This was the Israeli Pavilion, which is right next door to the US. And what they did was, it was all screens. You came into a dark space, there were big screens, you went upstairs, more screens, and all of this was going on simultaneously around you. And these people were all making portraits of themselves. Here they are, finished. And what they did with the portraits was they would stick a microphone right into the wet clay, and then they would start doing these primal screams into the microphones. So you had all of these screams going on. And it was about going into the bowels of the earth in Israel and, seeking life. This is when you walked in. The music was playing very loud, and the hole where they would have gone into and come out of. It was very moving, and it took a while to figure out what exactly was going on. This is Wei Wei in the German pavilion, because what the Germans and the French did, they decided to switch spaces because they felt that this feeling of nationalism needed to end, this extreme nationalism. So, for instance, in the German pavilion, which was now the French pavilion, there were no German artists. They had Ai Weiwei. And in the French, I believe it was a Polish artist. So they were trying to escape their nationalism. And these chairs, they're also down at the Perez in Miami right now. There's a group of them. And it's the idea of the tradition is dying in China. It was very impressive going into it. This is the British Pavilion. The British Pavilion was quite hysterical almost, because it was all, they were huge murals on the walls. And this was, the eagle is carrying the car away because there had been, this artist was interested in incidents that had happened recently in Britain and commenting on them. And evidently Prince Harry and a friend of his were at Sandringham, and they were taking pot shots at the eagles. So now they were getting back by lifting Prince Harry off the ground. And in the British Pavilion, they served tea. How very British. And this was a fire on the island of Jersey, because that's where evidently it's a major tax haven. So it was the burning of Jersey and all the rich man's money. And this was William Morris picking up a yacht, because evidently at the previous Biennale, there was a yacht blocking everybody's view. It was a Russian oligarch's yacht. This is the French Pavilion. It was so amazing. You walked into it, and all the walls were the spongy things for sound, big giant cones of sponge, so that the sound was really terrific. And on the walls were these huge screens with all of the music going, and it was Ravel and Unravel, and it was a, I didn't quite understand it, but it was beautiful, and it was wonderful to sit and listen to it, because they saw music as being as captivating as any art would be. This is the Japanese Pavilion, and this is after the tsunami. So those are all flashlights and all things that people gathered after the tsunami to survive. The food. It was almost as if it was a bunker where they could go to save themselves. And then they had this on the floor. This I sat for a long time and watched, because it was the weirdest thing, but it was fascinating. It was 8 hairdressers trying to decide, this is in the Japanese Pavilion, trying to decide what kind of a haircut to give this woman, and them arguing over this haircut. And it was the idea is, now we have to work the tsunami happened and we have to learn to work together. But I sat there for the longest time, because it was just fascinating watching with it and thinking, what is going to happen to this woman's head? This is in the Russian Pavilion, and it was all about greed. So obviously the population is reacting to what was going on there. And you stood around a rail, and all of these coins came through the ceiling down onto the floor, and if you wanted, you could go below and put an umbrella on over your head as the coins came down on you. Greed, cynicism, you know, and stupidity. This was one of the I don't remember which one it was, but one of the South American countries with the graffiti. This was just along the Grand Canal. There was an Anthony Caro exhibit in St. Mark's Square. Just took the Vaporetto all over the city. It's fantastic. You buy a ticket for the whole week. It was €50, and you never had to pay for transportation again. It's a great city to get around. And then the next day, I went to the Arsenale. Now, this is why it got called the Encyclopedia, because there was a man, Marino Oretti. This was his model for a patent. This was in the 50s, to make a museum of world knowledge. And he wanted it built in Washington, D.C., and it would be 150 stories high. It was an impossible dream to accumulate men's knowledge. And that was the thing that made Gioni want to do what he did with the format he chose for his exhibit. The Arsenale is a different kind of space. The space at the Giardini is more like a gallery space where you went from room to room all around circles and stuff. But the Arsenale is a big, long space because it's the boatyard. So you basically, a lot of the rooms were just one room deep, and you went through them to the next room. This was a whole room full of these large sculptures. This was a Chinese artist, and this was quite large also. And it was all done with a bamboo shoot and ink. So it's a drawing of extreme detail. It was beautiful. And then this is basically what the space looks like. So they redid it, but it still has the look of the boatyard. This was, what was this guy's name? This is an artist, Tapietti. I'm not saying it right. It's an Italian, a Spanish artist who just passed away. There were signs about him all over the city. Ah, my favorite, Phyllida Barlow. This is the first time I saw Phyllida Barlow, and I walked into the room because, like I said, the room, it's long and narrow, and you came through a doorway, and in the doorway were these massive, massive boulders. It was astounding to me. It made such an impact. And then when I'm standing there reading about her, and she's a retired sculpture professor who just became famous in her late 60s. It was like terrific. It was just a wonderful, I was very, very impressed with her at the Biennale. And then I came to find out that Gioni had done her first US show just shortly before. And right from there, we're lucky to get her here in the Norton. And I went to a lecture at the Norton, and she was wonderful. So then I went online because I got very curious about her. She's Charles Darwin's great-great-granddaughter. So it pays to have good genes. So they were just amazing when you walked in. And this is a woman, it was about her domestic life, so it's all kind of ceramics and pieces from her home. These were little photographs, and there were a whole series of them, and it's the man's wife in tremendous detail. Because this part in the Arsenale, more than in the other space, was about people. And Cindy Sherman was asked to be a guest curator, and she had all her albums. Evidently, she collects albums of people, and just ordinary people, you know, from flea markets and whatever. She takes her albums home because obviously she finds people's visions so interesting. And so there was a whole big section on persons. This is another one from that, the woman who had the sofa. And again, that personhood aspect. And this was the Book of Genesis, illustrated by R. Crumb. And he was an illustrator that a lot of people know. And he did this, and it was like 250 pages from Genesis. And there was a whole room full of them. Talk about obsessive. This was an artist who was in a mental institution, and those things hanging on the wall were his sheets, and he used to pull the threads on his sheets. And whatever discards were around the institution, they would bring them to him because he was constantly making things. And that was Gioni's point about the whole show, is the need people have to create, this primal need to create. This was a Polish artist who took life masks from people all over the city of Venice and then did these plastic bodies of them. Again, Cindy Sherman and her. So it was all focused on people all around her. This is a life cast also. And this is Paul McCarthy, and it's a ready-made, but he's got the innards all sticking out of it because a lot of his work is very perverse, about people spilling their guts. Man without a head up on the wall. This was a man, these were little tiny paintings of extreme detail, and he painted, some took him 2 years, 4 years, and then he would put prices of $25,000, $35,000 on them. He made 35 of them in his life and never sold one. These are little totems up over a doorway. This was what it was. This was an installation piece. This guy does large yard work. I can't see the names in this light. But anyway, it was impressive when you walked in the room. And again, this is one of the cafes. So you could take a break. I got there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I saw the Giardini till 6 o'clock that night, and I really had to rush to get through it. And the same the second day, going through the Arsenale. The next time I go, I will do 2 days per space because it's just so much to take in. It's astounding. I mean, and you're seeing a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of this. And then to top it off, then you go on the hunt through the city. That's amazing. This was the South African exhibit. And it was, I think we've seen something like this at Basel. And it's a history of South Africa through the encyclopedias. This was Argentina, very interesting. You walked in, again, it was all video. And these are all Evita. Evita gets up, Evita walks to the next space, Evita sits down, the other Evitas join her. And it was just a whole thing on Evita and her life. It was very good. This was the Holy See. This was the first time they were at the Biennale. And I thought, you know, what in the world are they going to be doing? And their exhibit was quite wonderful. It was very, very, very contemporary. And this is Lawrence Carroll. I've seen his work at Basel also. And what he does is he takes canvas and fabrics and he staples them all onto the space. They're large. And the idea of they were doing Genesis, and his was creation. The lights come from, he was living in Rome, and you have all of the statues in Rome with the lights around them, and that's what the lights are. It's supposed to be an iceberg. It's ice, and then the lights of kind of God on the ice during creation. This was amazing. I came into the room, and it was just a big pool of water, and then the city rose from the water. And it had to do with, again, a lot of the artists who go to Venice refer to Venice because they do spend time there. So it was about the sinking of the city. These roots were all above your head as you walked. and then you could go into the space. This was the Indonesian exhibit with the Indonesian puppets, the leather puppets, but these were life-size. So it was quite impressive. This was an artist that I saw in Berlin. And what happens with these trees is they're on tracks and they move around. This exhibit was only one tree. The other one I had been to were 3 trees. And they moved around the ceiling slowly. And then they would drop their, parts of them the longer they hung. It was a wonderful use of space. This was a group of South American countries together with spices and all the products of their country. This is towards the end of the Arsenale. They got into the countries again. This was the Bahamas. It was the first time they were ever in it, and they did an exhibit on going to the North Pole. I said, this is the Bahamas? But it was, again, there seemed to be a thing about getting away from this idea of just your little corner of the world and expanding beyond it. And I think that there was a lot about the written word and about that aspect of nationalism, non-nationalism, because of technology and what's happened in the world. I found that a lot with the exhibits I've been going to, where you're seeing artists are really touching upon crafts, again, things that they can touch, a book that they can open and read, the written word. I get the feeling that they don't want to lose it, so therefore they're referring to it. This was a Icelandic artist, and it was a performance piece, which I didn't realize. I was sitting there trying to figure out what was going on. It was a performance piece, a little band, and they just moved all through the Arsenale playing music. The Italian, this was inside the Italian, again, about writing. This was the Chinese exhibit, and this was massive on a wall, massive bubbles, and it would change. It would become abstract, it would become people. It was like society is changing at such a rate, you can't hold on to it. At least that was the feeling I had. See the figure there in the forefront? This was part of the Biennale, and she's an inflatable, and every night they would deflate her. Now I'm at the Guggenheim, at Peggy Guggenheim's, where I got my necklace. And she had a wonderful exhibit, her usual, with their collection, which is wonderful. I mean, it's right on the Grand Canal. It's her garden. There, her tombstone for her dogs in her garden. Madame Butterfly. She had a Robert Motherwell early collages exhibit, which has gone on to the Guggenheim in New York. And I was surprised because I love Motherwell's work. I wasn't aware that he did such a fabulous job with collages. They were just wonderful. Just fabulous collages. Not too large, but really beautiful. This is the Vaporettos zooming by San Marco. Just some people on the street hanging this sign about austerity. A dress I liked in a window. This was a Palestinian artist, and you went in and you would take a box and you could do whatever you wanted to the box and add it to the garden. And the idea was that someday you would be able to live where you wanted and do what you wanted to do in this world. Down the Grand Canal. This was a carnival dress. That's the outside of Peggy Guggenheim. They never built the second story on that palazzo. pigeons. There was a large Manet show on St. Mark's Square. It was beautiful. Huge sculpture. I've seen these at Basel. Then Wei Wei. This was in a church, and these were steel boxes, and you stood on the step and you looked inside the steel boxes. And it was Ai Weiwei when he was imprisoned. They were all scenes from his prison life in half scale. It was really, again, very powerful. There's Ai Weiwei taking a shower. My friend was with me who said, I don't know what he was complaining about. My apartment in New York is smaller. But it was really quite moving to go from box to box and see that he was under scrutiny every minute of the day. This is just on the street. This was amazing. This was Macedonia. And you walked into one of the palazzos on ground level. It was very, very dark. And you kind of walked your way through a maze of these things hanging. And they were cocoons. It took you a minute to realize they were cocoons, but it was beautiful. They were silk cocoons. And then these, you saw them just as kind of like a suede kind of thing, not really realizing they were rats. And what it was about the plague of the 1300s, the bubonic plague in Venice. So this artist came and did this whole thing, but it was beautiful. Eerie and odd, but beautiful. This was fantastic. Iraq had a whole palazzo, and they had 6 or 7 artists there. And there are no galleries in Iraq, so they had curators from Britain went over, and there was kind of an underground thing of artists that they were able to tap into. You see the T-shirts with holding your head with the bombs. And there were a whole series of photographs with people with Saddam in front of their faces that even with him gone, there's the feeling of his existence. And a painting on the wall, which made me think of how the city was destroyed. And this was their textiles, books. They had computer screens to sit and watch about things happening in Iraq. This was honey dripping, things made out of cardboard. They were creating out of anything they could get their hands on. He's painting a tree instead of the walls. And then this was a more traditional painting. It was very, very moving. And they served tea. Here's a bench made out of tires. Whole bedroom out of cardboard. And there was the kitchen where they served you tea. It was very nice. It was very moving and very warm when you went there. This was at the Institute of Music, and it was glass pieces that all stood for drops of water. This was Uzbekistan. You walked in and you felt like that's where you were. And then upstairs there were other artists as well. And you walked right through the room. This was Ireland. Photographers, you know what this process is. I don't really, but it was, there were photographs from the Congo. So it was very odd because they were all pinks and turquoises and beautiful colors, but most of them, the subject matter was just awful. I didn't take a picture of one of the awful ones, but it was, this was floating as you went down, as you were on the Vaporetto. I thought that was fun. And this, the whole time I was there, I kept looking. Prada had bought a new building and had an exhibit, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find the building. And I'm on the Vaporetta the last day on my way to the train to leave Venice, and there it was. But there were art pieces all over the place. It might be the last one. I guess it is. Anyway, I hope you got a feeling of what it's like, because it's the most amazing experience. And I can't wait to go again, because I know it's going to be so completely different. It had been just super, super modern, where they were saying, is it art, isn't it art? You didn't have that feeling about it this time at all. You felt that everybody who presented, it was serious to them. Very serious, and they weren't necessarily famous, so it made it, it was strictly from the heart, I thought, and just wonderful. And I will definitely, next time, I will stay longer, because it's just, I didn't get to it all. I mean, it was just so fabulous happening all over that city. I couldn't get over it. I mean, I always knew about it, and I don't know how I didn't go before, because it's not like the fairs. You know, it's not a feeling of you being sold to, even though I think the fairs are wonderful and we're very lucky they exist. But this was, it was as if you went to the largest museum you could imagine. Okay, that's it.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. This is just wonderful.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.